started.
Thank you very much, and welcome again to the webinar series of the Investor Dialogue by DGNL, which is an expert dialogue with investors about financing of the energy transition, which provides recommendations to DGNL on the state of play as regards public and private financing instruments and recommendations on their improvements or potentially new ones. We have today on the agenda the MFF, Multi-Annual Financial Framework, as well as STEP, the Strategic Technologies for Europe platform, both very relevant in current times. The first one, the MFF, because the context, policy context, since the origination of the MFF in 21 has changed. So there's an update underway. And the other one, the Strategic Technologies for Europe platform, the STEP, because with the publication of the Net Zero Industrial Act, the ambition to turn Europe into a climate neutral continent by 2050 is being complemented with the ambition to have the corresponding solutions also manufactured in Europe. This is the frame for today. The number of participants in the group today, we're counting 90, is proof of the relevance, and hence very happy to present you the agenda with an opening session, which is currently taking place. Julian will be given the floor shortly after for opening remarks, and then it will be the space for Gaetano and Edouard from DG Budget. And I'm personally very happy to see both DG Budget and DG Ener hosting the webinar today. And with that, Julian, I would hand over to you for opening remarks. Thank you.
Thanks, Arne, and good morning, everybody. And I don't want to take too much of your time because you are here for this very relevant and timely topic of the MFF midterm review and the proposal for the STEP. And the high number of participants this morning, I think, shows the high interest of the new initiative STEP and for the review of the midterm, for the review of the multi-financial framework of the EU. And I think it is also due to the fact that it's now the negotiations about these two initiatives are going into the final phase. And therefore, I think this webinar today is very, very timely, and I'm pretty much looking forward to the presentation of my colleagues. And the budget is of course important for the whole EU, as it is steering the financing to the EU policy priority areas. Not only the EU budget, but it also provides a framework for all other financing in the EU. And it is also very important for our initiative for the Investors Dialogue. As Arne was saying, since we are discussing potential upgrades of existing schemes under the MFF and also new initiatives, new programs, new pilots for future financing of energy projects. So I'm pretty much looking forward to the presentation and also to the discussion. I think it's going to be very interesting today. And with that, I would like to hand over, I think, one more time shortly to Arne, and then we start into the presentations. Thanks.
Thank you, Julian, for those opening remarks. I would immediately pass on the ball to the colleagues from DG Budget to start with their presentations. And the first one, well, by Gaetano and by Edouard. So welcome both. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Arne, and thank you also for inviting us to the Investors Dialogue and to make our presentation. Shall I share my slides, or you have them
We have the
I
slides
have them
and
here.
Sarah will navigate.
Okay, great, great. So
you just let me know when to change the slide.
Okay, many thanks. So the Commission has presented the proposal for a revision of the MFF last June 20. When the MFF was adopted in 2020, December 2020, the Commission had committed unilaterally to present a review at midterm of the MFF. And if necessary, accompanied by a proposal for a revision. And indeed, we can already go to the next slide, thanks. And indeed, what we highlighted in the communication accompanying the MFF midterm review is that the high number of challenges that have shown up since the adoption of the MFF has actually put the multi-annual budget under a lot of pressure. This is some crises that are a bit the fallout of COVID-19. For instance, the supply chains disruptions that already started in the course of 2021, and others that are more related to the Russia's war in Ukraine, with its humanitarian and economic fallout, not only on Ukraine, but also on the EU as a whole. The related increase in energy prices and the need to phase out the EU's dependency on Russian fossil fuels. High inflation, which is now declining, but is still much higher than the ECB's inflation target, as well as the increasing global competition with, say, a more proactive also policy being implemented by both partners and competitors around the world. And finally, migration and other global challenges related to global geopolitical instability. Part of it also related to, again, the fallout of Russia's war in Ukraine, for instance, due to the dramatic increase in food prices, which had a negative impact, especially on developing countries. So this is a bit the framework in which we have made our midterm review of the MFF. And the MFF has, the EU budget have responded to this crisis with the use of all the flexibilities that are available in the budget. We can go to the next slide, please. On the one hand, these flexibilities are to a large extent being depleted by the need to address these emergencies and unexpected crises. And on the other hand, the Commission has used all the possibilities also to redeploy from existing funds and existing resources. So against this background, the Commission has proposed a targeted revision of the MFF, meaning that it focuses on three key political priorities and two adjustments of the budget that we call technical to address a new macroeconomic context that is, for which the current MFF is no longer fit for purpose. The three priorities of the revision are the addressing the fallout of the war in Ukraine and therefore supporting Ukraine. addressing migration pressures and strengthening partnerships with third countries, in particular in the neighborhood, and supporting the EU's technological competitiveness. The two issues that required a technical adjustment to the MFF are the increase on interest rates, which has had an impact on all borrowers across the board, and therefore also for the EU that is borrowing to finance Next Generation EU. And the high inflation, which is having an impact on the fixed costs for the functioning of the EU administration. Next slide, please. So in this slide, I briefly present, therefore, how within the structure of the EU budget, the Commission has proposed a midterm revision of the MFF. So the current rules impose a maximum level of resources that the EU can call from member states of 2% of their GNI. So that's what is called the 2% GNI on resources ceiling. Within that ceiling, we have our maximum expenditure, that is the maximum ceiling of the MFF. So the first part of the proposal is related to an increase in the current envelope of existing funds. And in particular, this is an increase of 15 billion euro of the resources to address migration from the internal point of view, so border management, but also the external point of view, so supporting the countries where the migration flows actually are originating. In addition, part of these 15 billion is actually what is called the SEER, or Solidarity and Emergency Aid Reserve, which is an instrument of the EU budget to address humanitarian emergencies, both within and outside the EU. 10 billion euro is the increase for the programs that will support STEP, on which Eduard will come back later. And then we have an increase in the budget dedicated to administrative expenditure for 1.9 billion. But the main elements of the revision is the support for Ukraine, and support for Ukraine will come through a new Ukraine reserve of 50 billion euro of loans and grants, which I will come back to in a minute, as well as a new instrument to address the financing costs of Next Generation EU. Next slide, please. So the first element, Ukraine. The Commission wants to highlight with the revision proposal its strong commitment to supporting Ukraine, which also has a multi-annual nature. So since the war in Ukraine has started, we have scrambled a bit with support to Ukraine with specific support. Now with the revision, we are proposing support from 2004 to 2027 for a total of 50 billion euro in a combination of loans and grants. The split of loans and grants will be defined depending on the evolution on the ground. But also the annual split of this support will depend on the evolution on the ground. The support will be based on a plan that the Ukrainian government will agree on with the European Commission, and it will be then adopted by the European Council. And the loans part will be financed by borrowing on financial markets, as done with previous type of support to Ukraine, whereas the grant part will be financed by increasing the size of the EU budget, so by a new reserve above the ceilings of the MFF. So this signals both commitment and flexibility for Ukraine. The second priority, next slide, please. The second priority is to address external challenges, which are related, on the one hand, to the fact that unexpected crises and disasters are actually becoming more and more frequent, to which the EU has been responding to support our closest partners, but also our member states. And on the other hand, the fact that there are pressures on migration that are related to the situation and humanitarian needs in neighborhood countries and developing countries. Third, the EU wants to strengthen the cooperation with current candidate countries in the Western Balkans, and as well as confirm its support to Moldova, that has borne a lot of the negative impact of Russia's war in Ukraine. So for this overall priority, as I said before, we proposed an increase in our ceilings of overall 15 billion. 2 billion is for migration specifically. 2.5 billion is for the addressing emergencies and disasters with the SEER, and 10.5 billion is for support to partnerships with third countries. Next slide, please. The third policy priority, and here I'll only spend a couple of words because Eduard will go more in detail, is STEP. I will just say a couple of words on the budgetary construction, because for STEP we propose first a top-up of existing funds of overall 10 billion, plus we redeploy existing resources for 2.1 billion. So there's, on the one hand, strengthening with a top-up of existing funds. Second, we have new possibilities of pre-financing with existing cohesion policy funds. And third, we give member states the possibility to transfer funds from the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is the main component of Next Generation EU, to InvestEU. Overall, with the existing multipliers of these programs, we estimate that the potential of this proposal is to mobilize up to 160 billion euro. Next slide, please. And then the final component of the MFF revision proposal is what I called before technical adjustments to a new macroeconomic reality. First, the increase of interest rates. So interest rates have increased for all borrowers, including for the EU. To give you an idea, when Next Generation EU started in 2021, the interest rate on 10-year EU bonds was close to zero, or actually negative. And lately it has been hovering a bit above 3%. So that's a substantial increase. And whereas the EU budget with its legal provisions always will have the possibility to cover for costs coming from borrowing, the Commission has proposed an adjustment to the EU budget to basically provide already better predictability for member states on how the financing costs will be budgeted. And we have proposed a new special instruments that is above the ceilings of expenditure of Next Generation EU, meaning that within the budget we already have part of the financing costs that are covered, but on top of that we have added a new instrument which allows to cover all the overruns in this expenditure. So above the MFF ceilings, meaning that these funds will not affect other MFF programs. The second element is a strengthening of the budget for administrative expenditure, as inflation has affected the fixed costs like the buildings, IT, etc., energy costs for the EU institutions. And finally, we propose, and sorry, there is a mistake in the slide, a strengthening of the flexibility instrument of 3 billion, not 1.9 billion. Apologies for that. So the flexibility instrument is actually the only instrument that the EU budget has to respond to unexpected budgetary needs. So in an environment where the situation is much more unstable than it used to be in the past, it's very difficult to know from now until the next 4 years where we will need to strengthen some programs. And the flexibility instrument, therefore, allows us to allocate extra resources to existing funds, depending on the needs. So these 3 billion increases to strengthen our say firepower to respond to these unexpected needs. So this is the overall picture for the MFF revision proposal. Just a couple of words on the state of play. So the revision proposal was presented on the 20th of June. Negotiations have started with the Council right away. The Commission has stressed the importance that this revision is adopted by the end of the year because these budgetary pressures are affecting the EU budget already, and absent a revision in 2024, there are no resources to support Ukraine. So that's why in presenting the revision proposal, we stressed the importance of reaching an agreement between with the co-legislators before the end of 2023, so that the MFF revision can already feed into the budget of 2024. Now, the amendment of the MFF has to be adopted in a special legislative procedure, which means that to be adopted, both the MFF and any revision of the MFF regulation, we need unanimity among member states, unanimity in the Council, and the consent of the Parliament, meaning that the Parliament does not say propose amendments to the or vote amendments to the MFF proposal, but it has to provide its consent on the overall package. So, or the overall amendment of the MFF or the overall MFF proposal whenever a new MFF is presented, which means therefore that as unanimity is required, MFF negotiations are among the most complex negotiations within the EU. So negotiations are currently ongoing, and we will see how this will evolve before the end of the year. So this is it on the MFF revision proposal, and now I'll hand it over to Eduard, who will focus in particular on STEP, which is one of the key priorities, as I mentioned before.
Thanks a lot, Gaetano. Sound check. Can you hear me? Very good.
Yes, works well.
So thanks to Gaetano and to everyone participating in the webinar for connecting. I am Edward, a colleague from Gaetano, working in DG Budge, and more specifically on the STEP proposal, which, as he explained, was one of the priorities of the MFF midterm review. So my objective is to guide you through the main objectives of STEP, and then to take any questions which you may have. So if we can move to the first slide, please. What's the context for STEP? We live in a world where technologies change at a fast pace, and we cannot afford to be left behind. At the same time, our companies are facing numerous challenges. They're being affected by the global context, by a complex outlook of high inflation, high interest rates, labor shortages, disruptions in supply chain, spikes in energy prices, all those consequences from COVID and the Ukraine war. But in a nutshell, companies in the EU, and more specifically those which invest in the strategic technologies that will shape our future, they need our support. Or at least they need our help in leveling out the playing field when competition is not always on fair terms. And we must keep in mind that those strategic technologies are not only an economic opportunity for the Union, but they're also essential for the green and the digital transition. This is why the European Council already acknowledged in March 2022 in what is usually referred to as the Versailles Declaration, because there was a summit in Versailles. They recognized the need to strengthen the competitiveness of the Union, and they identified already a series of vulnerabilities. And as a follow-up to that summit, in March 2023, the European Council was even more specific, and they tasked the Commission to ensure, and I'm quoting here, to ensure the full mobilization of available funding and existing financial instruments, to deploy them in a more flexible manner to provide timely and targeted support in strategic sectors. Why am I quoting that more specifically? Because this is exactly what STEP does. We deliver on those objectives, and the design of this instrument, of the Strategic Technologies for Europe platform, is shaped by the March 2023 European Council conclusions. So you see in the slide that we have identified a series of technology fields. Those are three which are essential for the Union. Those are deep and digital, clean, and biotechnologies. And I'll expand a bit more on that in a second. So if we move to the following slide, you will see that STEP is not a new instrument, it's not a new fund, but it builds on the existing programs within the EU budget. So we have three main objectives. Those are the three pillars that you see on the slide. The first pillar, the first objective, is to better focus the programs. So we include certain flexibilities so that we can better target the sort of STEP-related projects through the existing programs. The second objective is to reinforce the budget of some programs in the EU budget, which we believe are particularly relevant for those critical technologies. And the third objective is to promote synergies amongst those existing programs. And now I'll explain those pillars, those objectives one by one. But maybe just to before entering into the details, some more basic remarks about the EU budget. You may know that the programs which are available under the EU budget have different characteristics. Some, if we take into account the type of management mode, some of those programs are being directly managed by the Commission, and sometimes that is delegated to executive agencies such as Horizon Europe, the Innovation Fund, the European Defence Fund, Digital Europe, etc. Then we also have programs which are managed together with member states, what we call shared management programs, and those mainly concern cohesion funds. And finally, we have a third category of what we call indirectly managed programs. That would be, for instance, InvestEU, which is being implemented by implementing partners. And the beauty of STEP and the beauty of the EU budget is that by as I said, each program has different characteristics. They target, they serve different purposes. They may provide with different types of financial support. They target different type of companies or beneficiaries. So by combining them, we can support a company throughout its life cycle, so that they can basically start in the union, grow in the union, and consolidate themselves in the union without having to leave. And just to give an example, you may be familiar with the European Innovation Council, which is part of Horizon Europe, and its main objective is to support startups and small mid-caps, which are non-bankable, so which cannot receive funding by commercial banks, and that's the very early stages of a companies that we support through the European Innovation Council. But then when a company becomes bankable, the support is provided, for instance, through InvestEU, and for instance, some of the equity instruments that we have under the InvestEU. And for instance, cohesion funds can support SMEs, but we have included some flexibilities to make it possible to support large companies also. So the objective is that those flexibilities and those different programs complement each other so that in the end we can better target those critical technologies. And then just a preliminary reflection. As I said, this is not a new fund, but it builds on existing programs in the EU budget, and that makes perfect sense. It makes sense that we build on the EU budget because the EU budget is a very powerful tool at the disposal of the Union. The EU budget has been provided support, in particular for the twin transition, in very significant amounts for the MFF 2021-2027. The projection is that more than 500 billion will be spent on climate priorities. That is more than 30% of the EU budget. Same for other priorities such as digital. So just to say that we're acknowledging the very important role that the EU budget plays to support our policy priorities, and this is why, with the changes that we propose, the adaptations that we propose under STEP, we believe that this continues to be the best way to support the critical technologies that we need in the Union. So we can move on to the next slide, where you will be seeing more or less this is also explaining the objectives in a bit more detail. So you see each of the programs, and for each and every one of them, whether we propose just flexibilities or also some budgetary top-ups. So maybe we can move to the following slide, where I will speak a bit about the scope. So those sectors that I was referring to before, the deep and digital, clean technologies and biotechnologies, we believe that those are essential for the competitiveness of the union and also for our strategic autonomy. The sectors have not been randomly chosen, but they stem from several analysis that we've taken into account, and all of them converge into those three main technology fields. For instance, just to name a few, not only the Versailles Declaration, but also the communication on the long-term competitiveness of the Union, the European Innovation Agenda, the updated new industrial strategy, which was accompanied by a report on strategic dependencies, the annual single market report, just to name a few. So all that has been taken into account when it comes to definition of the scope. Critical technologies in the STEP regulation are defined by reference to two conditions, which are non-cumulative, and this is important to recall. So we're basically saying that a technology is critical and can therefore be supported through STEP when either it brings an innovative element with an economic potential for the single market, so state-of-the-art emerging technologies, or when it helps address union strategic dependencies. So why did we design the definition by reference to those two non-cumulative conditions? Well, because we wanted to finance not only those innovative technologies, more state-of-the-art emerging, as I said, but also those technologies which we may have known for a while, but which we still need to support because they're key to help us address and reduce our strategic dependencies. And for instance, I mean, you should know that I'm not an expert on energy by any means, but renewables come to mind, right? I mean, STEP wants to support renewables, but some of those technologies have been around for a while, so we didn't want to have any question whether STEP could support all kinds of renewables that help address our strategic technologies. That's why even if someone could say that they're not innovative anymore, we want to cover them as well. The second aspect about the scope that I would like to stress is that you may have seen there is not a list. There is not an exhaustive list of the technologies. You see examples in the slide. Those examples are taken from a recital, which indeed provides some examples that help beneficiaries and member states and the Commission to have a better understanding what we mean by deep and digital, clean and biotechnologies. So you need to keep in mind why did we define the scope in such a way, and why is there not a list? You need to keep in mind that this is not a new instrument. We are not working here when we decided to draft the STEP regulation. We didn't have a blank canvas, but we're channeling STEP through existing programs, which already have a rule. Sorry, I mean, each program has its own set of rules, which defined many of their aspects, including their scope. So we did not want to, I mean, STEP and Article 2 of the STEP regulation needs to be seen as an additional layer that complements the existing rules on the scope for each of the programs, which we don't change. So the idea is not to have a list which may enter into contradictions with the rules already defining the scope of the programs. You need to keep in mind that those programs are of a very different nature. Sometimes those rules on the scope are defined on level 1. Also, sorry, by level 1, I mean regulations, directives. On other cases, they're complemented by delegated acts. Sometimes we have guidance. The level of detail is more or less depending on the program. There are annexes, etc. So we want to make sure that there is no contradiction between STEP and those rules on the scope. And most importantly, we want to avoid that the scope is too rigid, because precisely we're defining the technologies of tomorrow, which may not be available today, and we don't want to keep changing the rules on the scope too often. That's why the objective of the STEP regulation is to provide with strategic guidance on those 3 technology fields, together with the examples in the recital, while at the same time keeping the flexibility that will allow us to support those critical technologies in the future as well. Maybe the final point about the scope is that it supports not only the key technologies as such, but also their value chains. And through that, we could cover, for instance, critical raw materials, as well as investments in skills and labor, which are linked to those critical technologies. So if we move to the next slide, I will say a few words about the first objective. Those are the flexibilities. Oh, no, sorry. Here you have the investment area, so still the scope, and you have a breakdown of explaining to what extent each program could potentially contribute to those different technology fields. So if we move to the following slide, please, I will say a few words about the flexibilities. So the first objective of the STEP proposal, we have proposed flexibility in relation to a number of different programs. For instance, in relation to InvestEU, we propose the creation of a new window, the STEP window, and then we propose some flexibilities to make it easier to set up those that new window. We also propose some flexibilities in relation to the European Innovation Council. But right now, I will mainly give an overview about the flexibilities that we provide in relation to cohesion policy funds, which is the most significant part of our resources that we try to mobilize through STEP. So basically, in addition to the creation of new strategic, STEP priorities that will allow us to better monitor and track the use of resources, the main novelties is the fact that we open up cohesion funds for large companies. So the ERDF and the cohesion fund will not only be able to support SMEs, but also large companies. And this is in a limited subset of member states, so in all developed and transition regions, but also in more developed regions for a limited subset of member states to preserve the cohesion principles. But this is an important flexibility at the disposal of member states. All of this, again, is up to member states, up to them to use. And the second flexibility is the possibility to enjoy financial incentives in relation to STEP projects, which are in particular 30% of pre-financing, so a higher rate, as well as 100% rate of co-financing for STEP projects, again at the disposal of member states. This is to compensate for the administrative, or let's put it differently. This is to incentivize member states to reprogram their cohesion funds towards STEP priorities, because those programs have been agreed already. So they've been agreed with the Commission, those priorities have been defined, and all of a sudden we make this proposal and we are asking member states to reprogram again, so to reopen their programs to take into account STEP priorities. So of course this is costly for them. There's an administrative burden there. So in order for this to become attractive, that's why we provide with the financial incentives that I just mentioned. If we go to the second objective, that concerns the budgetary top-ups, which Gaetano briefly mentioned already. So for key programs which we believe are essential to support critical technologies, we propose additional 10 billion. You see the breakdown. in the slide. So 3 billion for InvestEU, $500 million for the European Innovation Council, together with redeployments and decommitments, 5 billion for the Innovation Fund, and 1.5 billion for the European Defence Fund. What we've taken into account as well is the efficiency of those programs. So, for instance, just to give an example, the multiplier rate of InvestEU is 10, which means that for every euro spent of the EU budget, we are able to mobilize up to 10 euros of private support. So that's a very efficient use of the EU resources, and that should be taken into account. And I mean, we've during the negotiations, we received a lot of questions asking for justifications. Why do we need those budgetary top-ups? I won't enter into that level of detail, but in a nutshell, what I can say is that the common feature of all those programs is that they are severely oversubscribed. So demand exceeds the amount of resources that we have. So unfortunately, many projects cannot receive funds, even though they're eligible and they exceed all the minimum criteria under the calls for proposals. And finally, a couple of words about the third objective of STEP, which is to promote synergies amongst the several programs of the EU budget. I will start with the sovereignty portal, and then I will finish my intervention by speaking about the sovereignty seal. So the sovereignty portal aims at gathering all the available information about funding opportunities in a single website. So you might be surprised, but that doesn't exist at the moment. So you would think that in the European Union, if you're a company, you would be able to go to a website from the Commission and then specify what type of sector you're working on, or what type of company, what type of product you're or service you're providing. And then that you would get feedback about all funding opportunities under the EU budget. That is not the case. So what we're doing, I mean, this would be the ideal scenario. What we're doing can be seen as a pilot. So we aim at having that kind of tool, but for critical technologies. So for those three sectors that fall within the scope of STEP. At the moment, we have a website gathering all the information with the support available under directly managed programs. So those that I mentioned at the beginning, Horizon Europe, European Digital Program, EU for Health, etc. But that information is not coupled with the information about shared managed programs. So the calls for proposals by member states under Cohesion Fund are available elsewhere. And what we try to do is to combine that information into a single entry point, so that investors can have a much better overview in what way they can combine support from different programs under the budget, always subject to the applicable state aid rules, of course. But that's the main objective of the sovereignty portal. And then there will be a team, that's the third bullet point, in the Commission that will act as the back office to provide with support to project promoters, to member states, and to implementing partners, and to make sure that all this fits together and is implemented in a coordinated manner. And maybe a couple of words about the sovereignty seal. And we can actually move to the following slide, which explains how the seal would work in practice in more detail. We can go to the following slide, please. Perfect. So basically, the seal is a label. So as such, it does not grant any funds. It builds on the Seal of Excellence, which is granted under several directly managed programs, Horizon Europe, for instance. And basically, we're giving the Seal of Excellence whenever a project is eligible for funding. So they meet all the quality criteria for a call for proposals, but there's not enough funds available. So we have projects which cannot be funded. In that case, they receive the seal of excellence as a way to acknowledge their relevance. So the objective is exactly the same, but in this case, the sovereignty seal would acknowledge the relevance of a specific project for the competitiveness of the union and to address our strategic dependencies. So we would sort of certify that a project is in line with the STEP objectives, and we would give it not only to projects that have not been able that meet all the quality criteria, all the terms of references under the calls for proposals, so that exceed all the thresholds, but not only to those projects which have not been able to receive funds, but also to projects which have been able to receive some funds, but not to cover all of their costs. And what are the advantages of having the seal? Well, again, it's a label, so it doesn't have any money attached to it, if I can say it, in very plain terms. But it would allow a project promoter with the seal, for instance, to go to their managing authorities, to their member states, and whenever they ask for resources under cohesion funds, member states would be able to fast track their assessment, because basically the policy check doesn't need to take place anymore, because we have certified that project is in line with the STEP objectives. And what is nice about the sovereignty seal is that it doesn't entail a new process. It builds on the existing evaluation systems which we have in place already for each and every one of those directly managed programs on the first column, to assess if a project meets all the quality criteria under the calls for proposals. So our teams already have to go through the projects and make that assessment for the purposes of determining whether the project qualifies for financial support. So in this case, we will use the same assessment, but just add a final layer to grant the actual seal. I think I will leave it at that. Gaetano already gave you an overview about the negotiations. Just to say more specifically about STEP, that the Parliament reached an agreement on their position concerning STEP on the 17th of October. So we're pending the agreement now on the side of the Council on their negotiating mandate, so that we can start trialogue soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edouard, and also Gaetano. Very precise and useful presentations, demonstrating the drivers which prompt the Commission to respond, the corresponding key priority areas proposed, as well as the key actions under that, and then also the deep dive into STEP. I would see that very relevant from two perspectives. Number one, because it clearly explains the thinking that has been behind the proposal being made by the Commission, and also making reference to the end of your presentation, Edouard, as regards beneficiaries, which should be the ultimate purpose, because they will do the developments that will help Europe to achieve its policy objectives. And from own experience, explaining what the EU has to offer is cumbersome and repetitive, but the more insights there are available, the clearer it is, because the mantra is, if you are a company and you have a funding plan which includes sources from the EU, you should be spending as much time in qualifying and understanding that investor as you would do for any private one, where it is much more accepted, I would say, to do this kind of pre-application due diligence. I'm also happy to note that we have an additional 10 minutes for questions and answers. Initially, there was scheduled 40 minutes, which have now turned 50. The first questions are already appearing in the chat. what I would propose is to first dwell a bit on the MFF review. So to cover the part which Gaetano has presented before going into STEP. So please type your questions in the chat. That's the preferred way. So we can read your questions, filter them, and then give them to the presenters. So first on the MFF review, and then we will go into the questions related to STEP. So far, the questions are only related to STEP. So colleagues from DG Budget, I would allow a bit more thinking time and also typing time. So we have the first question on MFF, which is related to not this MFF, but the next one. And the question being from unknown user.
It was me. My name is Rickard Venetjoki, and I'm working for E.ON. And I asked a question on the next MFF and whether it's about time to start focusing on that or if it's too far ahead.
Yeah, can reply. Many thanks for the question. So the Commission has a legal deadline to present the new proposal for the next MFF, which is the 1st of July 2025. So we're still is still let's say relatively far, not too far actually, but it's still almost 2 years from now. Just to clarify also a couple of elements on that, note that so the new proposal will have to be adopted before the 1st of July 25, and at the same time, next year in June, there are European elections. The current Commission will complete its mandate and a new Commission will be appointed. So there's also a political transition in the meantime, which has to be factored in, since I mean, in the end, the MFF is a bit a translation in numbers also of political priorities, and of course, these are defined by the new college, by the new Commission. So in this sense, it is not too far ahead, not too far away, but still it's early to think about how this will be designed. And just another element to add, as always, the MFF will then legally it has to have a duration of at least 5 years. In the past, it's always been 7 years. The duration is another element that actually will be part of the discussions and then the negotiations.
Thank you for elaborating on that, Gaetano. In the meantime, there has popped up one more question from Javier Dominguez, which I think is initially related to the MFF review, about the impact. We have already seen, or you have already provided insights on what were the major drivers which the Commission has taken into account, but maybe good to elaborate a bit more on those or repeat.
Sure. So as I was saying before, we had a succession of unexpected events, macroeconomic shocks, and geopolitical tensions since the end of 2020 when we adopted the MFF. The thing is that The MFF, when it is adopted, it has some degree of flexibility within. So we have some room of maneuver to move money between funds. We have, as I mentioned before, we have some budgetary margins. We have the flexibility instrument, which allows us to increase some funding to some programs. But overall, these flexibilities are very small. Our total budgetary flexibility at the time when it was when the MFF was adopted was 1.4% of the overall size of the MFF, whereas the largest chunk of the money is already either pre-allocated to member states with the cohesion funds, common agricultural policy, and other smaller funds, or it is already allocated to specific programs given their own legal sectoral legal basis. So this means that when a large unexpected shock like the war in Ukraine, with inflation reaching 10% in the EU, with the energy crisis, etc., arrives, then we have limited room for maneuver. The Commission tried to respond using all our flexibilities to provide support to Ukraine with a limited revision of the MFF last year to provide loans to Ukraine directly guaranteed by the EU budget. And also to address the energy crisis with Repower EU that I imagine you're all familiar with. But the thing is that in doing so, we were able to address the crisis via the EU budget, but this has depleted the flexibilities that we had. And the issue is that now looking forward to 2027, well, first of all, by the end of 2023, there would be no resources to support Ukraine further, as the war actually is continuing and nobody knows when it will finish. And on the other hand, as we go further to 2024, if we were not to revise our budget, basically we would have no resources to address any other unexpected event. As so this, on the one hand, the rigidity of the EU budget, but also the fact that we already used most of our flexibility, plus the inflation that had a strong negative impact linked also with the increase in interest rates, then it really limits our room for maneuver. An additional element that we should add is that when the MFF is adopted, the regulation, the MFF regulation establishes the ceiling, that is the maximum level of expenditure for every year. And those ceilings are fixed at constant prices, so prices of 2018 for this MFF, and then they are adjusted with a fixed deflator of 2%. The idea of this fixed deflator is that it gives a lot of predictability for member states for their contributions, but also for the beneficiaries of EU funds, because you know how much in nominal terms this will be in the coming years. But the problem is that when inflation is much higher than 2%, as it has been in the last couple of years, this means that in real terms, this has had a negative impact on the size of the EU budget. So we can do less with the amount of resources that were decided in 2020. So of course one cannot adjusting completely to inflation. The EU budget would have required an extra effort in terms of contribution from member states that we did not think appropriate in a moment of budgetary consolidation. But at the same time, this is an additional argument for us to say, look, we need to reinforce, at least in targeted elements of our MFF, to actually be able to respond to these challenges.
Thank you very much, Gaetano. This also links to a question which Amy Radelberger has put, and that is about the perception of missing references of the MFF review to climate change and the European Green Deal, with the impression that funds are being allocated elsewhere, and the question whether you can comment on this.
So,
yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gaetano. I will complement afterward.
Yeah. Okay. No, I'll just spend a couple of words and then I'll also hand it over to Eduard. Again, when proposing the MFF revision, we highlighted the fact that we were presented a very targeted revision to the needs that were most urgent and could not be financed with the available resources. There are other issues, many other actually, but of course we could not realistically propose, given also the constraints in terms of the need for agreement, unanimity, etc., an all-encompassing revision of the MFF. For climate, I also want to highlight that this MFF has a strong focus on climate with its the additional support that the RRF and Next Generation EU are providing, and we are not, say, reorienting resources that were aimed at climate expenditure to other priorities. So those are being maintained, while at the same time we need extra support. And STEP actually contributes to that, and then I'll leave it to Eduard.
Yes, so maybe I'll try to give some feedback on the several questions regarding STEP, and I'll start.
2 minutes. Finish your track and I can...
Sorry, there was
Please continue. I think that was an unintended intervention.
Can you please mute yourselves, please? Thank you. So when it comes to climate spending, well, not only the existing and the current MFF is devoting a substantial number of resources towards our clean objectives, but also the midterm review it's also about clean. I mean, one of the 3 priority fields that we have identified under STEP are clean technologies. So not only the flexibilities, but also the top-ups that we have proposed, those 10 billions, will go to InvestEU, will go to the European Innovation Council, will go to the Innovation Fund. I mean, the Innovation Fund is strictly speaking limited to innovative net zero technologies, but the InvestEU and the European Innovation Council also are essential programs to support clean investments. So I think the clean angle or the climate angle of not only the MFF in general, but of the MFF midterm review is a very strong one. Then bear with me because I'll go through the questions. So one of those concern not only, I mean, the need to support not only. I'll try to summarize the question so that people can follow my intervention. So one of the questions is about not only supporting, if I understand correctly, innovative technologies, but also to strengthen, critical supply chain, to support their growth, manufacturing capacities, etc., etc. So will the STEP initiative support those activities or those objectives? Yes, absolutely. This is why, as I explained during my presentation, critical technologies are defined not only by reference to whether they are innovative, but also by reference to whether they help us to reduce or prevent our strategic dependencies. And another aspect to keep in mind is that we propose to finance two activities. Those are the development and the manufacturing in the Union of those critical technologies. So we acknowledge that those are our weaknesses, especially the manufacturing. That's why we wanted to cover more specifically those two activities in the scope. Another question is about the sovereignty portal and when it would start to work. So, well, I mean, it's difficult to say with precision at this stage because we are very much depending on the progress of the negotiations. But we are working already to start the preparations, and we hope that at some point next year there could be some sort of sovereignty portal, at least in a very, beta preliminary version. But we'll know more when the negotiations advance. Another question concerns the mobilization of resources, and our colleague Javier is asking why not to balance the energy budget by decreasing funds to more polluting oil and gas technologies to use that to finance renewables. I have to say the bulk of the support from the EU budget is towards clean technologies, meaning renewable technologies. You know very well that some energy technologies, such as gas, for instance, have been recognized to be essential during the transition to help those member states and those regions which are too dependent on more polluting fossil fuels, such as coal, to progress on their transition. And that is, for instance, why the taxonomy acknowledged the role of gas during the transition. But I would say that the bulk of the support is already diverted towards renewable energies, and that will be exactly the same under STEP. That's why we have a reference to clean technologies. Then there's a very interesting question by Jessica Johnson about the links between STEP and the Net Zero Industry Act. So thanks a lot, Jessica. This allows me to clarify this very important aspect that I didn't cover during my presentation. So the Net Zero Industry Act, together with another proposal, which is the Critical Raw Materials Act, those are aimed at simplifying the regulatory framework for those technologies. But it's not about the funding. It's about the regulation. So their objectives are different and therefore complementary. NZIA and the Critical Raw Materials Act aim at promoting those technologies and those products, for instance, by simplifying the permitting for those technologies and products, while STEP will be the financing tool. And actually, there is not a cross-reference, legally speaking, in the STEP regulation, but our intention is that the scope of NZIA and the scope of the Critical Raw Materials Act is perfectly aligned with the STEP regulation. So STEP will be able to provide support to those technologies under NZIA and the Critical Raw Materials Act. NZIA because it's broadly aligned with the definition of clean technologies, and the Critical Raw Materials Act because, as I explained, STEP covers not only the critical technologies which we have identified, but also the upstream value chain, and therefore the critical raw materials that we need to produce those critical technologies. So complementary, NZIA, Critical Raw Materials Act, regulatory aspects, STEP, financing aspects. There is actually, I believe it's the same participant that is asking about nuclear. So an important aspect to clarify is that we don't we don't change the scope of the existing programs. So as I explained before, the scope of STEP is not defined in isolation, but it needs to take into account the existing rules which define the scope for each programs, and we don't change those rules. So whether and to which extent a program can finance projects related to nuclear energy is already determined under such program-specific rules that we're not going to change. I think that those rules are pretty detailed when it comes to nuclear. For instance, I mean, it's even excluded specifically in some of the programs. For instance, the InvestEU regulation, if I remember correctly, it excludes the decommissioning, but also the construction of nuclear power stations. Same for the ERDF and cohesion funds. And more generally speaking, as regards nuclear energy, the EU support is provided usually via specific programs on research activities, I believe, concerning nuclear, and focused mainly on the activities of decommissioning, so making a nuclear power plant inoperative and to dismantle it safely. So we have specific programs for that, and for the rest of the programs, the rules do not change. And to my knowledge, those rules are laying down specific exclusions for nuclear energy, and we're not intending to change them, which I believe was your question. And then there was another interesting question about Horizon Europe and the redeployments from Pillar 2 to Pillar 3. I don't see it now, but if I remember correctly, a participant was asking about our proposal to redeploy 800 billions from Pillar 2 of Horizon Europe to Pillar 3 of Horizon Europe, which is the European Innovation Council. Well, in that respect, two aspects. First, the need to pay attention to redeployments. Gaetano was explaining to you that budgetary negotiations are always extremely complicated, and this is because member states pay attention to the impact for their contributions towards the EU budget. So we propose 10 billions of top-ups, meaning new fresh money. But it's also important to identify if we can make a better use of the available resources. This is one of the main comments that we get from member states. And this is why we propose those limited, I have to say, funds for redeployment. 800 million is less than 2% of the budget, which is available under Pillar 2 of Horizon Europe. And basically, there is no contradiction in terms of the policy objectives. So we're not taking money away from Pillar 2 to finance something which is completely unrelated to it. But basically, through the European Innovation Council, we can finance exactly the same policy priorities that we would finance under the Pillar 2. So Pillar 2 can finance health, digital industry, climate, energy, mobility. All that is possible under the European Innovation Council. But the European Innovation Council allows us to better target the big tickets that we want to support through STEP, and the critical technologies that we want to focus on. Because let's keep in mind that the European Innovation Council is our flagship program for innovative technologies. It allows us to develop and to scale up those breakthrough technologies and those game-changing innovations. So that's why we believed it was really important to strengthen the role of the European Innovation Council. And this is as far as I've managed to read.
Okay, thank you for that, Edouard. I see two more questions that are in your direction. The number one is whether research is also eligible for STEP financing, or if this is only for later stage projects. And another question, which is on the other side of the spectrum, though for a specific sector, which is a question about the, I understand, the eligibility of or the necessary investments in, for example, grid technologies or manufacturing capacity. So projects that indeed require huge volumes of investment.
Yes, and I also see a question on the GBER regulation and state aid. So maybe I'll say a word about that. Look, I don't want to be very precise on, you know, the on the specific sort of not only activities, but on the specific technologies which may or may not be covered. I think, you know, this will depend a lot on the outcome of the negotiations as well. We'll also see whether we need some sort of complementary guidance. What's crystal clear is what we have in the proposal. So that small caveat to say that, of course, I mean, in the end, the scope will need to be further defined and fine-tuned by the Commission through the calls for proposals that we will launch for directly managed programs, but also by member states, because member states are better placed to assess and to consider what investments are relevant for their regions and for their territories. Having said that, yes, as I explained, the objective is to strengthen manufacturing activities, but not only. That's why we also cover the deployment activities. I see that another question concerns again the balancing between, you know, funding allocated to different energy sources. So I believe I replied to that already. And I see another question on the STEP platform, whether member states will have to report on the national funding of STEP seal projects. Yes, but keep in mind that the seal will be granted by the Commission through directly managed programs, and this is because of you know, practical considerations. As I explained, the evaluation processes to assess the projects for each of those programs are already in place, and we want to build on that. And even, you know, of greater importance, we want to make sure that the seal is implemented in the same manner. So by limiting the award of the seal to the Commission, we can make sure that the conditions which are fulfilled for a project to be awarded the seal are exactly the same, and that everyone is treated in a fair manner, which would be more difficult to coordinate if the seal was awarded by managing authorities in different member states, which would have different goals for proposals. But of course, I mean, as I said, the objective of the seal is to promote synergies. So once you receive a seal by applying through the usual calls for proposals for funds under a directly managed program. And again, let me stress that this is not watering down the quality of the projects, because you will only be eligible for a seal if you exceed all the thresholds, all the quality thresholds under those calls for proposals. Then you get the seal. And the advantage is that you can go to your managing authorities and they would be able to fast track the support that that they may provide to that specific project. And of course, then there's going to be coordination and communication between the Commission and the managing authorities about the specific support provided, to make sure that there are not duplications also. And then when it comes to the question by Hugo about the general block exemption regulation, no, we have not proposed any change to GBER. Basically, there's a couple of state aid dimensions linked to the STEP proposal. But we haven't proposed any amendment to the existing state aid legislation. The first aspect is that DG Competition, our colleagues in DG Comp, are running out a consultation about the possibility to change the level of aid intensity for several regions. So the regional aid guidelines, and in that sense, I mean, this will also be relevant for STEP because again, these synergies, the possibility for a project to receive support from different funds is ultimately depending on the state aid ceilings. So the state aid ceilings are defined depending on the regions as well. So any change in the state aid regional guidelines would also need to be taken into account for STEP. The second aspect that we're looking at is to try to simplify the procedures for state aid clearance and for assessing whether a project can benefit from support under one of the programs, because at this moment, I mean, it's all being managed by the Commission for directly managed programs, but I mean, the state aid is the responsibility of our colleagues in DG Comp. The financial aspects are the responsibility of the lead directorate generals in charge of the specific programs. So we're trying to see to what extent there could be synergies, there could be, more coordination, at least in terms of timing, so that a project promoter, for instance, receives feedback about their application from the perspective of the finance, whether that project will be eligible for financial support and to what extent, but also to receive feedback on the state aid clearing, if that entails some sort of state aid by member states, for instance. So those are the state aid dimensions, but strictly speaking, no change to the GBER or other state aid rules.
You are muted, Arnie.
Oh, yes. Thank you for that, Sarah. Thanks, Edouard. As you've already elaborated on procedural aspects to achieve synergies in the context of GBER, there's also one question about the one-stop shop within the Commission. Maybe you could elaborate a bit on this in simple words from your point of view. What is it supposed to do and how will it work?
Sorry, I was muted. So as I explained, the one-stop shop will be the back office that will make sure that STEP is implemented in a cohesive manner. The challenge is that this involves many different programs, directly managed, shared management, indirectly managed. So we need, for instance, if we look at the directly managed programs, we have, of course, like in DG Budget, we have an overview of the EU budget, but the programs are being implemented specifically by lead DGs, for instance. So I don't know, you would have a Connect for Digital Europe, EU for Health, Horizon Europe is managed by RTD, etc. So there is a need to coordinate internally on the calls for proposals for those directly managed programs that will concern a STEP. Then when it comes to shared managed programs, not only for the flexibilities, but also for the reporting obligations that will be essential for the seal and the sovereignty portal, there is a need to coordinate with member states, so Commission with member states and member states amongst themselves. So this will be another important aspect of this one-stop shop. And finally, there will be a need to coordinate with implementing partners in charge of InvestEU. So that coordination is important, but even more important, the one-stop shop will be in touch with project promoters, will be in touch with investors. So not only the information will be available on the website and that's it, but if there is a need for follow-up, that will be possible. And the objective is that investors in the union, but also from outside the union that want to establish themselves here, that want to help us improve the development and manufacturing capacities of the union, that they can be supported, that they have a clear team that is able to explain to them, to guide them through the sometimes not very intuitive processes of financial support available under the EU budget. So as I said, this one-stop shop will be the back office that will provide support on the financing elements of those critical technologies, and of course, in a sense, they will also complement the existing, the platforms which might be created for other objectives. And I say might because I'm thinking about NZIA and the Critical Raw Materials Act, which also promote platforms, but they have a different objective. As I explained, they're focusing on the regulatory aspects. So in that sense, they will be complementary with a step one-stop shop.
Thank you, Edouard. And allowing you a short break, there's one open question left in the chat, which is related to the MFF. And the question is from Charlie Blackbro, whether the EPBD, so the Energy Performance on Building Directive, national renovation plans are linked to the MFF, or if they are kept separate in the NECP process.
Arne, can you please repeat, because I
Yes.
couldn't hear the question.
Yes, the question is, are the EPBD national renovation plans linked to the MFF, or are they kept separate in the NECP process?
Yeah, thanks. No, they're not part of the MFF in particular, but one should have to consider this together with other plans that have been or are being prepared at national level a bit in a coordinated way. So even though this is not part of this package, then it's still consistent, let's say, with what we are proposing. And actually, I want to stress this because especially for what concerns energy, the green transition, etc. Whereas we are going now to this MFF revision, actually. What we have done when we proposed the MFF in the first place in 2000 we adopted it in 2020, and then with REPowerEU, actually we're always going on the same direction. That is, we already saw at the time of the adoption the need for the energy and green transition. This has been strengthened with the energy crisis, and so the adoption of REPowerEU, and now with the MFF midterm revision proposal with STEP, actually we're still going on that direction. But as I said, it's a more limited package. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. There are no more open questions in the chat. All have been answered. Thank you very much, Edouard. Thank you very much, Gaetano. With that, we would move on to the topic of conclusions. Julian, you've already turned on your camera again. Do you want to go first, or shall I make a quick recap?
No, please go on with a recap. I only wanted to thank indeed Edouard and Gaetano again for the excellent presentation and also for the encompassing feedback on the questions, which were ranging quite a wide field of policy areas, especially with respect to energy, of course. Thanks also for that, and thanks for this excellent webinar.
Yeah, I can only second you, Julian. Excellent presentation, very clear on again presenting what has been the drivers behind the MFF revision and proposal and the STEP proposal, with all the constraints which are there, like the management of the different instruments, the budget consolidation, also the agreement process that needs to be passed by those proposals to actually come into place. From the discussions, I've also noted 2 points. One is there were several questions about the eligibility under STEP, where I think you have also clearly explained that there are 2 criteria and no exhaustive technology list, and why that is. And I also saw a certain cluster emerging around synergies, which is the 3rd priority in STEP in the middle, with a clear presentation on the one-stop shop and the sovereignty seal, as well as the sovereignty portal. At least when it's going to be expected. On the sovereignty seal, from my point of view, a very clear presentation on where are the benefits to be expected. So thank you very much for that. Would there be any complementary points, Julian, or from the presenters?
No, just thanks a lot to you again for inviting us. It was a real pleasure, and I hope this was useful.
No, indeed, and it was very useful. I think also for the future work in the investor dialogue, but also for the broader audience. I see today we are not having only participants from the investor dialogue workshop working groups, but we are having a bit broader audience, which shows again the high interest in this in the MFF and in the new initiative of STEP. So yeah, thanks again, and thanks also to all the participants in the webinar today for the lively discussion and for your numerous questions. I think by those we covered really a wide area of topics. Thanks again.
Okay, then final remark. So thanks again for everyone for being present here, for asking your questions, for Gaetano and Edouard to be present and answer all of them, which I'm very glad to see. And the last word, should you be interested to learn more about the investor dialogue on energy, feel free to visit the website and subscribe to the newsletter. And see you back for the next webinar to come. Thank you very much. Have a great remainder of the day.
I was gonna add one will be website in the following days, as well as the recording of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. Goodbye to everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.